This is the first of a two-part tutorial giving you an overview of using layers and masks. In this video, I'm going to explain to you what layers are and how they're used differently by photographers and graphic designers, and how understanding them can give you an unprecedented level of control over your images. Stick around to the end and I'll give you a link to a free PDF reference sheet for this tutorial, along with a complete Photoshop file I'll be demonstrating on. You lucky people. Often, editing newcomers looking at Photoshop base their understanding of how layers work on having seen animators or graphic designers use them. Because of this, the idea of adding one element on top of the other makes no sense for a photographer unless they're looking to make a composite from many different images. But photographers use layers completely different to graphic designers and use entirely different tool sets on them. Let's see how designers and photographers' use of layers is different. To illustrate how a graphic designer uses layers, I'm going to show you how I put together an earlier version of the thumbnail I used for this video. The concepts involved in the layout for this thumbnail are the same as you would use for a poster, album cover, or any single page design. You start by listing the elements you want on the page, titles, body text, graphics and logos, etc., and then work out the layout based around those elements. As this video is about layers, the first element I locked down was the background image. I used a screenshot from a tutorial I had created in Photoshop, which included dozens of layers showing different effects. I zoomed in on the screen so that you could see only the layers panel and the photograph. I chose this particular photograph as there was lots of blank space on the left-hand side to act as a clear background for the text I would need to place. The next thing I did was add and position that text, starting with the title and then the body text. I made the word "understand" pink to stand out from the background and draw the viewer's eye, and added lines between the letters on the word layers to denote, well, layers really. It looks fine, but doesn't really pop, so I added a huge saturation layer to boost colour, and then another couple of elements between the text and the background to separate them further. Another thing that graphic designers do is use artboards in Photoshop, which allow you to take all those elements that we've just created, put them in another folder in the layers palette, and then define a background of a different size, typically Instagram post, story, Facebook and YouTube thumbnail sizes. That way you have one Photoshop document with all your different file sizes and formats, which you can then export all in one go. The point being that designers tend to start with a number of elements that need to be included on a page, and then set about adding them one by one on top of each other in individual layers, making a final composite image. Now for photographers, this is useless. They don't want to add different elements to an image, and if this is how Photoshop layers have been explained to you, you'll no doubt find the concept very confusing. Now you know how graphic designers use layers, let me show you how photographers use them. Photoshop is structured to make sense to photographers moving over from film, and the same principles that apply to film photography apply to digital imaging too. Let me show you what I mean by starting with how film photographers printed their images, so you can see that Photoshop is built using the same rules. Back in the day when we used to shoot film, it came in a strip like this. You would cut the image you wanted to print into a separate cell like this. Then you would move to this device, an enlarger, used by film photographers to print photographs from their negatives. So this doesn't become over technical, I'm not going to talk about the ins and outs of how an enlarger works, just describe the concepts of what it does. Essentially, it's just a bulb that you can switch on and off, which shines a beam of light onto the surface below. You would place your negative in the negative holder, and the light shining through it would project it onto the enlarger's surface. When you had it all set up so that the image was sharply projected, you would turn the light off and then put the light sensitive paper onto the surface. You would then turn the light back on and wait several minutes as the image appeared to burn into the light sensitive paper, creating your print. Now, as you can see from this animation, the image appears faintly at first, and as the paper continues to react to the light, becomes more solid. The period of time this took could be changed, and a greater degree of control of the finished exposure could be gained by the introduction of two techniques: dodging and burning. This is a dodge tool, essentially a thin stick with a circle of cards stuck to it, like the one I'm holding now. If you held the dodge tool between the light and the paper, the light would be blocked, meaning that the area in its shadow on the paper would be brighter in the final print, like this. This is a burn tool, a big piece of card with a hole in it. If you held this over an image, the light would pass through the hole only, making that part of the paper darker, like this. As you can see, there's a lot of different skills required to get the perfect print, and also the need for tremendous patience. Photographers would print dozens of images looking to create the perfect exposure balanced for light and dark. And for every individual print they made, this entire process would have to be repeated each time, requiring great amounts of time and patience. Also, because the changes were made directly onto the paper that created the final image, if you got it wrong, the paper along with your time and effort were wasted, and you'd have to start all over again. Think how much nicer it would be if instead of making those changes directly onto the print itself, there was a way where you could put individual clear sheets between the light and the print and add your dodging and burning to those instead. That way, you could build up layers of subtle effects on those clear sheets instead of the print, and if you got it wrong, you could simply remove that sheet and start on a new one. This is exactly how Photoshop works for photographers. Let me show you. Here's the picture of Maya again. When you open your photos in Photoshop, they become the background layer, as you can see here. Think of it as being the print in the darkroom version of editing. What we are going to do is make changes to the overall image by using something called adjustment layers. Using these, we will create 4 different looks for the image by building up layers of colour and light. You can find adjustment layers here by clicking on the circle of 2 halves icon at the bottom of the layers panel. There are 19 different adjustment styles here, but we're only going to make 4 changes to this image. The first adjustment we'll make is by using colour lookup. Simply click on it and you will see it appear in a layer above the background. I have my properties panel over here on the left side of my screen. If we look at it, we can see that it shows, unsurprisingly, the properties of this layer. Selected in the panel is a section named 3D LUT file, beside which is a drop-down menu containing a number of LUT files included with Photoshop. So what, I hear you ask, is a LUT file and what does it do? It's quite simple. A LUT file remaps every single colour in your image in order to achieve a different look for the image. LUT stands for lookup table, and essentially a LUT contains different values for every single colour your screen reproduces. Let me show you. If I asked you what the colour on the left of this image is, you'd say red, or at least I hope you would. Likewise, if I asked you what the colour on the right was, you'd say also red, Bill, or possibly words to that effect. Possibly ruder. And you'd be right. They are both red, but there are different shades of every colour, depending on things like hue, saturation, and luminosity. To put it another way, it's why the colours shift on your TV when you change the settings from standard to vivid. A LUT is simply every possible colour your screen can show, remapped to a slightly different one. If you move your mouse down the different LUTs in the drop-down menu, you'll see the colours shift either subtly or dramatically, depending on your selection. Some LUTs emulate old film stock, while others go for a very specific look, like candlelight for example, but all they are doing is remapping colours to create a different look. For this photo of Maya, I felt it looked a bit cold and flat, so settled on the 3-strip LUT to add more warmth to the skin tones. This LUT gave Maya a lot more depth, rediscovering shading lost in the original edit. The 3-strip LUT reproduces the look of a Technicolor 3-strip camera, first introduced in 1932, which captured separate red, green and blue records onto 3 strips of black and white film. There's a link to learn more about this below if you're curious. Let's pop this into a folder labelled A, Colour Lookup Tables. You can do this by clicking on the folder icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. A folder will appear in the Layers panel called Group 1. Double-click on this name to highlight and rename it, then drag your layer into it. You can open and close the folder to see the contents anytime. While I liked this effect, I felt it darkened her skin a little too much, and so added a Curves adjustment layer. As you can see in the property panel, the curves window shows the histogram for the image just like the one in your camera. Dark areas to the left, bright areas to the right. I like the overall balance of light to dark, so just use the lighter preset available in the drop-down menu here to increase the overall brightness of the image. Let's put this in a folder named B, Curves. Next, I wanted to add another colour element to the image as I felt it was still looking a little flat. I wanted to add more depth by increasing the range of visible tones. Specifically, I wanted to add a blue tint to the image. I clicked to add a colour fill adjustment layer and selected a neutral blue from the colour picker window. As you'll see, this results in a solid colour fill on the image, another graphic element if you will, which is no good on its own. This is where I'm going to introduce you to the concept of blending modes. In this drop-down menu at the top of the Layers panel, which is currently set at normal, you will find 26 blending modes, which affect how light works on the layers below, using, in our case, the colour blue that we selected. It's possible to make a lengthy video about what these modes are, and I will talk about them in another video, but for now, just move your mouse up and down them to see the changes they make to the image. As you will see, sometimes the image is very dark, sometimes very bright, depending on the mode you choose. So it helps to add another curves layer above, as you can see here, and use it to brighten and darken the image in conjunction with the mode selected on the layer below. This idea of playing with the tools in Photoshop makes learning the program hugely enjoyable, and I would strongly encourage you to click every button just to see what it will do. In the end, I settled on using the screen blend mode on the colour fill layer and adjusted the curves layer to bring down the excessively bright areas. When you've done that, pop them in a folder named C, Colour Fill and Curves again. The final adjustment layer we'll add is the black and white one, and the Properties panel will show you the various colour sliders you can use to adjust the image. And before you say, "But it's black and white, Bill," the sliders adjust the tones of the colours in the original image. Try adjusting the yellow slider, for instance, and watch how dramatically the background changes. Move the red and watch how skin tones change. The background will change too, because yellow as a colour has elements of red in it. Once again, play with the sliders. Try the presets in the drop-down menu, add a tint, change the colours, experiment and play. When you've done, create another folder and call it D, black and white. Close all the folders and your Layers panel will now look very neat and organised. If you click on the eye icons beside the folder, you will hide all the effects. As you can see, what we've done is build up a series of changes to our base photo using a simple number of clicks. Remember when I said the process of printing a photograph with an enlarger would be greatly improved if you could add your changes to separate layers instead of directly to the print itself? That's exactly how Photoshop works. The great advantage to it is that if you make a change and then decide you don't like it, you can simply turn it off and leave it there in case you change your mind again later on. It's incredibly flexible. Before we finish, I want to draw your attention to the white squares that have been appearing beside each of the adjustment layers. These are masks, more of which in the next video. Adjustment layers are the foundation for making changes to an image in Photoshop. Once you realise that the changes you wish to apply to your image can be applied a layer at a time and then hidden if you change your mind, you'll start to understand the scope and creativity for experimentation such individual control can offer. In the next video, I'll show you how you can gain even greater control with adjustment layers by the addition of masks. Yay! Don't forget to download the PDF and Photoshop file used in this tutorial using the link below. If you do, please give this video a thumbs up, it will help me out. And subscribe if you want to see further videos. You can also ring the bell to be notified when new videos become available. You can download information sheets for all my videos from my website, which also has my blog, info about me, and of course my photos, because once again, if you're going to take photographic advice from anybody, make sure they take photos you actually like. See you next time.